All right, welcome to the Distilled Spirits Council Ask the Expert webinar series. I am Caleb Ross, Director of Member Services and Business Development at the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, also known as DISCUS. Today's topic is Tips to Demand Forecast and Plan for 2025. Great name. With Ian Perez, Head of Brand Art by MHW. I'll introduce Ian after some housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available on the events page of the Discus website as well as our YouTube channel. Discus is the leading voice and advocate for our members and the distilled spirits industry overall. Discus provides a wealth of resources and services, including this webinar series that aims to educate and to share relevant trends, ideas, resources, discussions, and opportunities. All these webinars are available at distilledspirits.org/events. And with that housekeeping taken care of, I want to welcome today's speaker, Ian Perez. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Caleb. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, and we'll take questions throughout. Use the raise your hand icon at the top of your screen or put your question in the chat. We'll also save time at the end for Q&A. Ian's contact information is on the slide and will be in the email we send with the recording to the link as usual. You should feel free to contact Ian directly, or we can put you in touch. Late this week, we'll send everyone a link to the webinar recording, or early next week. Ian, let's get started.
Perfect. Well, yeah, it's really nice to be here. Thank you again, Caleb, for having us. My name is Ian Perez. I am the head of Brand Arc at MHW. For those not familiar, MHW is a prominent importer and distributor in the United States for the past 30 years. And I manage the Brand Arc function, which focuses on helping brands get new products to market. So we help with all things graphics design, brand naming, sourcing liquid, componentry, glass, label design, all that kind of fun stuff. But we also help medium to larger size clients who are already established with their supply chain. So optimizing their supply chains, order forecasting, demand planning, managing their orders, scheduling productions, and all that kind of stuff too. I've been in the beverage alcohol industry in the US for almost 6 years now, later this year, but I've been in the food and drink space for the last 14 years. I graduated with a bachelor's in food science and innovation in Ireland, and I moved here in 2019 as part of a master's program I was doing with the Irish Food Board and UCD Smurfit in Ireland. And I was very fortunate to get a placement, international work placement with MHW. And we started Brand Arc in 2020, early 2020. It was called Concept Commercialization Program at that moment, but we recently rebranded earlier this year, which we're really excited about. So the goal of today's call is to go through, again, all things forecasting, demand planning. All of these thoughts and opinions are of my own, from my own experiences. There's no essential mathematical formula for this. Again, all thoughts are my own. So hopefully folks can grab some insight from that, and we can get some good questions and kind of share our experiences. And like I said, the takeaway is that you come back with some good tips and tricks on how to navigate the murky supply chain space as well. So where we will start is, again, forecasting and demand planning. It really depends on the business. I've been involved in a number of projects, worked for a number of companies, and they all have their slight different nuances in terms of how you forecast, how you plan, and how you order. So again, we'll go through those considerations. I'll talk a bit about what I feel is a good forecast and where I feel like I'm in control, and I feel like I know what's kind of coming down the pipeline and I'm prepared for multiple scenarios. We're going to talk about how we can potentially improve the forecasting accuracy via better communication, relationship management with all stakeholders. So not just internal stakeholders, but external stakeholders as well, to make sure that all folks are working in the right direction and we can plan accordingly. And then most importantly, regroup if any supply chain or any issues with manufacturing occur. We'll also talk about how technology can potentially improve your forecasting and demand planning for the years to come. And then we'll finish off with some kind of alternative solutions in terms of how folks can potentially demand plan better, depending on what type of business they have, type of products they have, and again, most importantly, what size they have and what size they want to become. So this question kind of focuses more so on, or consideration, sorry, focuses more on a new brand kind of starting off. And it can be very challenging to figure out, again, how much do I order? I've never made this product before. You can find data online or through agencies and services via like Discus and other organizations as well. But it's really, really hard to right out the gate come out with a really accurate forecast. Some data can be great, as in you can see certain brands have sold millions of cases in the year prior, but that might not help you as a new entrant to the market too. So a lot of brands kind of focus on what's the minimum order quantity versus like excess storage. So obviously for a new brand, you kind of want to order thin because you, again, don't know how well this is going to go. It could be you only have so much level of capital and investment, so you kind of have to start off small and build a brand. And then the question is, again, if I can order more than the minimum order quantity, what is the storage cost like? And then depending on the price of the product, like how much is tied up in how much of your capital is tied up in finished product. You really want to consider the cadence of production. So are you producing just once a year? Are you producing weekly? Are you producing bi-monthly or producing on a quarterly basis? So again, depending on your organization, that's a really important piece to understand as a supply chain person or supply chain manager. Really crucial piece that I feel like a lot of brands that I work with, sometimes they don't fully understand the lead time for reordering. And this can catch a lot, especially new brands out, because you could order a minimum order quantity, as an example, could be a couple of hundred cases. And God forbid it goes really, really well. And you start seeing really good traction. People are really interested. And now suddenly you're seeing those depletions come through. And then you go to reorder and it's like, oh my God, it's going to take me 3, 4, 5 months potentially to get more product because I didn't understand the lead time of my bottles. I didn't understand how busy the maybe co-packer is, as an example. I didn't understand how often certain folks are filling or emptying barrels or finishing product in different barrels, as an example. So really from the get-go, understanding the reorder lead time is super, super important. And then with that being said, when should you reorder? So what are my reorder points? What inventory levels should I get to before I start to order again? And then as you start to identify these elements, you can start building out a rate of sale. And then as soon as you hit certain reorder points, you start ordering more product. And then you also work on having buffer stocks in terms of finished product readily available also, so that when orders from distributors, retailers, your customers start coming through, you have inventory and access to inventory. And then when you get to a certain threshold, it's like, okay, by the time my new product comes in, I'll have outsold, and you're kind of constantly on supply. Because the worst thing that you can happen is you build up a good reputation, you start selling, you start doing really, really well, comes to the reorder point, and then you have no inventory left. And all of that hard work can almost go out the window because they might not wait for 3 months for your next bottle to come through, or your bottle of bourbon, or your gin, or your RTD, your spirits-based RTD. So all that hard work could be gone, and then all that hard work could go to a newer brand that is readily available at the same kind of price point, same type of product. So again, really, really important to understand your reordering. And as part of that, your entire supply chain. So whether it's vertically integrated, as in you control the majority of it, or whether you have multiple suppliers and multiple production sites, and you have a liquid producer, and then you have a bottler, and then you have a labeler, because sometimes there's not always a one facility that does all those pieces. So again, really understanding when you're building the brand or your existing brand, fully understanding your supply chain to help you, again, make sure that you constantly have access to your product and you can forecast accordingly. Again, as I touched on a little bit earlier, data is really, really important. So whether you're an established brand and you have years of data that you can go back through the archives, that can be great and can help you make decisions going forward. But context is really key, and I'll kind of hit on that in a moment. But then also there's data out there that might not be relevant to your business, depending on, again, there might be a larger brands out there that are selling well, that data might not mean anything to you. So again, trying to find the right data that fits in terms of what you guys are trying to achieve is really, really important. And then secondly, or lastly, sorry, the team is really, really important. So even medium-sized companies are pretty scrappy. They might have 3 or 4 or 5 people managing all the day-to-day. You might have a senior executive managing operations, finance, and sales. So again, really understanding who's looking after what, and then maybe at a certain point you realize you need help, and it's whether you want to get a system in place to help manage this, whether you want human resources in to help manage this, or maybe you're potentially looking to outsource to a company, depending on, again, capital investment, how good you guys are doing, essentially. So going into signs of a good forecast for me and from previous roles, realistic is really, really important. I'm all for shooting for the stars and missing slightly, but having something realistic is really, really important to hold on to, especially as you're talking about getting future investment, shareholders, and all that fun stuff too. So again, having a forecast grounded in reality is really, really important. Being a little bit conservative doesn't hurt sometimes, because under promise, over delivers a kind of mantra I always try to operate on where I can. And then forecasting, you can never think too far ahead. So one thing I always kind of talk about internally is the difference between forecasting and demand planning, because I feel like those terms are used pretty interchangeably. And basically the biggest difference is the forecast is just a general plan, goals, and strategy for the year, for the quarter, or for multiple years. And then once you've outlined what you're actually trying to do, what you think you can do based on projections, based on buy-in from distribution, from retailers, from your customers, you can then implement that strategy, which is your demand planning then. So you're planning for that demand, and you're making sure you have enough inventory to facilitate those orders and that demand. Fluid and measurable I put together, I should have put as one bullet point, but essentially having a fluid forecast is really, really important so that you can actually change if circumstances do change from month to month. To give you a real life example, we just launched a new RTD in January, and there's multiple pack formations of that one product. And we were kind of doing even splits of everything. So we'd make like 50-50, or sorry, like 30% one, 30% the other, and 30% the three split. But then after we figured out the rate of sale, suddenly people were moving more towards the 12 pack versus the 6 pack, which was a little bit of a surprise. So being able to be flexible, not having too much inventory tied in, so that we could maybe change orders, move some stuff around, work with the production facility to make sure that they can produce and they have enough raw material of those cans, cartons, partitions, shippers, you name it. So having it fluid really helps you with changes in the year, because there's so many unforeseen circumstances that could come about. And then measurable, being measurable is really, really important. So whether you're tracking it weekly, quarterly, monthly, my forecast was 1,000 cases from January to February. Like, where is it as of right now, as of February 25th or 26th? Being able to measure against it only helps you, again, collate more data to help you make better decisions. Any questions there, Caleb, before I keep going, or are we happy to?
I don't see any questions in the chat right now. But what are some of like the pain points or things that you would tell like a small up and coming craft distiller to really look out for when they're forecasting to get through a hurdle, or something that you've seen that a lot of craft distillers have done in the past that messes up their forecast?
I see, again, lead times is really, really important. So sometimes when you're first talking with a supplier, it's great. They can get you stuff really quickly. They're really after the business. And then once you get those first few orders in, you kind of have an idea of, okay, I placed an order today, I'm going to get it in X number of weeks. But really understanding what those lead times are, and I'll go into it a little bit later in terms of communication, having a consistent dialogue with as many stakeholders as possible, even if you're purchasing multiple years of inventory for whatever reason, depending on shelf life, you have good storage capabilities. But to go back to a point I had made earlier, like cardboard is relatively cost effective compared to a lot of ingredients. So if you were not fluid in terms of like planning, you could purchase 2 years worth of, say, those 6-pack cartons that you're thinking of doing. But then 3 months later, the market's only telling you that everyone wants these in 12s because they can't get enough of them for whatever reason. So now you have all this inventory sitting around that maybe it wasn't super expensive to store, but now it's expensive to get rid of, and you might not need it anymore. So again, planning like that is really, really important too. Understanding those lead times, understanding those minimum order quantities, and then also understanding what price breaks you can get if you can order more product too. So without jumping too far ahead, those would be kind of very top line things I would be considering as a craft distillery or a person who's purchasing or using a craft distillery as a co-packer.
We did get a couple of questions
Oh,
in the
sure.
chat. One is what level of granularity is important for starts? SKU, sub brand, plus size, etc.
All the data is the more data you have, the better you can use it. Again, it'll take time to really kind of manipulate it, go through it, discard what you might not need, but the more, the better. I like to go into the granular pieces. Sometimes I really love just getting really stuck into a complicated spreadsheet just to get away from emails and phones for a bit, just so that I can get into that kind of piece too. But you'll be surprised by just looking at it and observing it and running it by people that's where a lot of really good ideas start to come about and plans, because even if you're a small team and someone might not be super involved in the supply chain, like you'll be surprised when someone can drop some sort of insight, which is really, really important. So yeah, I would say the more data you have, and again, going back to my previous point with the measurableness of your forecast, comparing it like consistently with what you thought will only help you this time next year when you're growing and you can say, okay, these are the learnings I had. This is what I actually did too. And what I'll kind of if it's okay, I can go on and cover one point because it's like good timing. One thing that I found very challenging if I was to start a new role, and you're looking at forecasting for the year, one of the worst things sometimes is just kind of using last year's data. If you're in a spot where the brand you're working with has like a rate of sale for a number of years, looking at last year is just not always good enough to be like, okay, we did 10,000 cases, let's plan for 10,000 cases plus 5% in a good world. Context is really key. So if you're a new hire and you're straight out of college and now you're looking at you're a demand planner for brand X, looking at last year's data could mean absolutely nothing to you because there's global pandemics we've experienced in a not so distant past. The weather, like if you have a ready to drink product, as I was talking about, like we had a really bad summer in the states that you're working in terms of weather, or there was, God forbid, wildfires in California, those type of things, and sales dropped. Like you're not going to know that from looking at it in say January of 2026. So again, just looking at last year's data can be really important, obviously, but again, context is really key. So that's where I talk about the measurableness and kind of always comparing of like what we did, where we wanted to be versus what we did. That's really, really important. So yeah, if you have any more questions, Caleb, go ahead.
Yeah, we have one more. One question was big hurdle. If we try to do custom bottles in the USA in huge minimum quantities, we source internationally, but are there items out there to help folks source custom bottles domestically?
So there is not as many options domestically as obviously you would get from China, India, and Mexico. But like I said, that's an area of the business that we also help and get involved in too. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if it's a very complicated bottle, you might have more challenges because the molds and the R&D teams might not be US based. But if it's something a little bit more like straightforward, you're just putting like a logo in there, there's definitely flexibility stateside. And also what's great about that, just to go in terms of custom bottles, what's really important to consider is that I know a lot of brands, their kind of strategy is an exit at some point. So the more aspects of the supply chain that you control helps with that valuation. And then from a supply chain demand planning perspective, if I'm purchasing custom glass, I know like the lead time, it's way more control for me. It makes my life easier because you could be dealing with stock bottles, which is nothing against stock bottles. There's like really great options out there, but the industry has really moved towards stock bottles, especially with the larger companies out there. So that bottle that you could easily get, and the supplier was emailing you saying, "Hey, we've got tons of these in stock. Like, do you need more?" Suddenly, when you do need them, they've been purchased by one of the large players as well too. So but no, definitely, I would love to chat with you on custom bottles because I think we could definitely kind of offer some solutions there in terms of helping you find the right producer.
All right, the community has answered this next question, but we do want to still hear your thoughts. They asked, how often do large corporations usually review their forecasts, weekly, monthly, quarterly?
From my experience, like I had a meeting like almost every week. Like in a previous role before I came to the US, I worked for a pretty large, the second largest European food producer. And I had 400, just in my division, I had 400 products, and each product could have 10 to 30 plus raw materials from preservatives, flavors, processing aids, colors, additives, you name it. So we would pretty much check in almost weekly on that, just to see if there was anything with regard to that. But again, it really depends on your business. The cadence is really, really important. But again, the key is just having those meetings, because again, even if they're 5 minutes, like everything's on track, we're doing okay, couple of questions here and there, it's way better than not. And I'll go into the communication piece shortly as well, to kind of talk through utilizing those principles across the supply chain and across your stakeholders. It can only benefit you guys in the long run.
Okay.
Perfect. So timing is nice. We can go into communication. So one thing that I found to be very beneficial is, even if you're not ordering consistently from certain suppliers for whatever reason, you might have enough inventory. Having regular check-ins is really, really important, because just having general chit chat with them, you might be able to find out, oh, there's some either constraints at the supply chain level. So like understanding when their closures are. So if you're dealing, say, out of Italy, like a lot of folks on this call who deal with Italian suppliers know, in like the month of August, like guys are shut down for weeks and weeks at a time. So when you have a relatively consistent dialogue, even if you're not purchasing product like every month or every couple of months, just knowing those little nuances like could help you in the long run. So understanding that, oh, like we're going to be closed for 2 weeks because we're doing maintenance, or we have a new machine coming in that's going to slow the whole thing down. Like when you know those little tidbits at the raw material level, like you said, it can help you plan for that and get ahead of any potential future delays. Because again, that new machine could be up and running in 2 weeks time, but does it run at the same level and capacity as previously? There's extra parts needed, extra maintenance, because it's not quite working out. So again, you're not going to know that unless you've had a random call potentially with that supplier and vendor, just to, again, just talk through things, talk through plans. So obviously you don't need every day to be like texting, WhatsApping, or getting on Zoom calls with them, but having some sort of regular check-in every other week, once a month, it only helps you. Same with if you're using a third-party manufacturer. So as well, understanding like what closures are happening, any scheduled maintenance. Maybe they signed a new customer and they have less capacity than they once had. Like you might not get that if you're not in constant dialogue with them, or in a consistent sort of dialogue, which is really, really important. Your supply chain team as well. So like, just if you are as a business owner and you need to know like what's being ordered, what's not being ordered, like being able to manage those orders on the fly. You might say, oh, we have a huge order coming through that we just signed a new client or a new customer or a new distributor in a new state, or we're expanding. We need to basically let the supply chain team know that, okay, we need to up everything because now we're in Texas, now we're in California versus just in Illinois, as an example. Another crucial point that I feel like this one brands sometimes lose track of is the sales and marketing side. Sometimes I feel like in certain companies, they can be very siloed, the sales and marketing team. So they could be working really hard, creating great content, getting feet in the street, doing tastings, pourings, doing all that great stuff, working really hard to get cocktail listings, all that great stuff. But sometimes it's not communicated back to the team. Like it's just kind of celebrated internally, like lots of high five and like, yeah, we did it. But actually, what's on order? What are we producing? Do we even have enough to fully commit to that order or commit to that new client? It's really, really important. Like when I worked as more dedicated procurement manager, I would have salespeople come to me all the time saying like, oh, we have this like huge win just today. Like I need 4 million cases of X. And it's like, well, that's actually impossible. So when the sales and marketing team know what's happening on the supply side, also it can help them being like setting expectations for their customers also. So versus promising and under delivering. And again, also understanding what your customers are doing, rather either your distributors or your retailers. So like what promotions are coming around the corner. What maybe if you're in a new state, there might be some sort of festivities that are happening that you might not be aware of because you're not from that state. So understanding what your customers are doing, what they're planning to do, only helps you, because again, the last thing they want to do is you have this great promotion coming on board. It hasn't been communicated effectively enough, and then suddenly you can't facilitate that order, and all that hard work has gone to another client or another brand, as an example. So those were kind of definitely big areas that I would focus on in terms of how to improve your forecasting accuracy.
And we had another question. For small back of house teams working in a medium-sized company, what are the key roles for effective demand planning and supply?
So I would say you kind of always need some sort of person that's looking at this set fairly regularly. So I'll go on to it later, where I talk about like forecasting solutions. So if you're like a smaller brand, hiring someone dedicated to do this might not make a lot of sense, because depending on what state you're in, the cost of living, you might, like, depending on experience that you're looking for, it might be very prohibitive to hire someone on a fixed annual salary. It also might be very hard to find like a part-time person maybe later in their career that is happy to kind of dip in and do a couple of hours here, there, and everywhere to kind of help with that. Because also it's not just about planning, it's also implementing the plan and staying on top of the plan. So a lot of
Mhm.
people, like I've worked with like colleagues, and it's like, I placed the order and like they said they were going to deliver this day and it's not here. And it's like, well, did you get order confirmation acknowledgement? It's like, no. I was like, oh, there you go. So like, it's not just like doing your job sometimes is not always like the be all and end all. It's the follow up, it's the follow up, it's the begging, the pleading. And like I said, communication, constantly getting on top of that. Because again, we're all busy, we're all doing a lot of different things, especially if you're a smaller brand. Like, you're the marketing person, you're the salesperson, and you're the operations person. And then you're talking to the investors about getting more capital, you're doing the research, you're doing R&D, you're working with like to with manufacturers on new SKUs and stuff like that. So again, finding the right solution, whether it's technology, which we'll touch on shortly, or whether it's hiring or outsourcing, it's really important to have someone looking at this as a regular person, whether it's once a month, whether it's once a quarter, depending on the cadence of your production. So um, but again, I'd be more than happy to talk with that person who had that question as well about kind of some solutions that we could potentially provide, or just general guidance.
Nice.
So moving on, technology can be absolutely brilliant and could make your life almost to the point it's so good that you might not be necessarily used anymore. There's always the worry with AI and tech that it might start replacing some people. But again, the critically thinking is so important, even with the aid of ERP systems and technology and enterprise reporting and planning software. So if you're kind of on the small to medium size, you're starting to do really, really well, you're getting some extra investment in technology, is a great way to put some money. So there's phenomenal systems out there of all shapes and sizes, all types of costs, and depending on how many products you have. Like, you might not need something like SAP or Oracle or those guys if you have two SKUs and there's just a bottle, a label, a front label, a back label, some liquid, cap, a shipper. But if you're at a point where you have dozens of RTDs and then you're doing some white label for maybe some like big retail chains, like, you're going to need a pretty sophisticated software system. And there's various ways that you can integrate software into helping your forecasting piece. So you could just have, like, you put in a quantity that you want to make as an example, or a forecast you want to make over a period of time. And based on your bill of materials, it will spit out saying, okay, for you to satisfy this demand, you're going to need X number of finished product cases, plus you're going to need X number of bottles, X number of front labels, back labels, et cetera, et cetera. But there's even further integrations, which are really interesting too, with regard to like your orders coming through. So if you are in a spot where you can get your distributor orders or retailer orders to feed into that system, there's companies out there that have real-time aids which help you basically say, okay, for you to facilitate this demand and basically what you've ordered and what this new order comes through in real time, it should say, you know what, you probably need more cans, or you might need more front labels, or you might need less back labels because actually the order got slashed because they swapped one product in for another, and the split is there. And then again, if you're on it and you have time, you can go in and then readjust and then talk to your suppliers and say, okay, do you know what, I'm not going to need as much of this product because they're putting it more in this other product, as an example too. So like I said, if you're in a spot where you can invest, some of these are well into six figures, but there are some craft ERP companies out there too for craft distilleries, which are really exciting as well. So you can kind of still get that assistance and that help without the huge outlay, because doing it in Excel, doing it on your own, the more human aspects of it, the more chances of human error. So again, having some help in there is really, really important. But also, to kind of add to the human factor of it, like being able to critically think and adjust is really, really important. So I remember a great example from a previous role where there was there was some sort of either like a tsunami out near Madagascar. And one of the products I had loads of vanilla in it, and I was kind of running low. And my system is telling me, okay, this is my forecast and my demand for the next 6 months or a month or whatever the case may be. You should order X. But knowing that there is potential weather issues, it could hurt crops, it could hurt yields, it could hurt storage. I should probably up my orders based on like just common sense and what's happening in the marketplace or in the global scheme of things. So that using that kind of like again, using your own nous and your own thoughts helps aid those systems because again, they're pretty accurate for the most part. But again, having that human element, being able to understand certain factors that can't be put into a system is also really, really important. And again, like I said, the investment piece is really, 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 really critical there. So in terms of alternative solutions, sorry, any questions, Caleb, as well on that?
Yeah, we have one question. Is there an affordable ERP system for small businesses?
There's a couple of companies out there, and like I said, I'd be more than happy to touch base with them. The individual asked a question to talk through kind of how that works, and obviously other solutions too. And then obviously we have a bunch of clients who've used different technology and different systems across the MHW company portfolio as well. So yeah, be more than happy to share that information with that individual.
Thanks.
And then like kind of this is the last piece to touch upon in terms of like outsourcing. So like especially as a lot of new brands I talk to, they don't always necessarily come from not just the beverage alcohol industry, but a manufacturing industry at all. People have made money in real estate, they've made money in finance, they've made money in I don't know film or whatever the case may be. So understanding that you might have a weakness, like you might be the best marketer, you might be the best salesperson, but like you're going to have weaknesses out there. So when you're looking to outsource, the key is, again, if you have a weakness, why don't you outsource it and give it to someone else who has either the time, expertise, the nous, and the know-how and resources. So when you outsource, you also have control of like your priorities and your detail and strategy. But the key is that you kind of control that too. And like I said, I'd be more than happy to chat through any folks because we offer that service to clients too. If a fixed asset is too expensive, if we're kind of not at that point in our piece yet, but if we just need help ad hoc on a quarterly basis, there are companies out there that can kind of jump in and do a bit of help for a couple of months at a time, get you kind of set up for success, and then kind of come back in if the need arises again for a future SKU as an example. And again, it's cost effective, it's flexible, and like I said, it's not a 12-month commitment with salaries, bonuses, and just general human resource issues that you might have in terms of hiring and potentially letting go of staff as well, depending on your business strategy and model too. So definitely, like I said, be more than happy to chat with any companies interested in talking through outsourcing in terms of like what capabilities we have and insights we can offer and share. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Like I said, this is all my thoughts and opinions from 14, almost 15 years of doing this. I really hope there was some, everyone got a little bit of something out of this. And like I said, more than happy to answer any questions now or in the future. But yeah, thank you very much, Caleb, for having me.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure having you guys. And of course, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Or if you have a question, yes, we will share those slides with you. And then also you can take that email address from Ian and reach out to him directly, or you can reach out to membership at distilledspirits.org if you'd like to follow up with him in another way. So with that, oh, sorry. We have one more question. Who are some recent clients that you've worked with?
So some recent clients, probably the most exciting one recently is Maru High, a new ready to drink malt based, so malt spirit that we launched in January. That's the biggest brand we've worked with to date. Our first production was 30,000 cases, and we've produced 60,000 cases as of right now, producing another 30,000 cases in 2 weeks' time. So the Maru High is a really, really big brand we're working with. Other prestigious brands, George Dickel in Tennessee. We've worked with them on a number of SKUs. They won as Wine and Spirits Enthusiast Brand of the Year in 2023, which was really exciting for us because we had 2 releases that year with them. Cascade Moon, another one. And then to talk more about kind of more craft side, like we recently launched a bourbon brand in June of last year, New Dawn Distilling. And yeah, it's a wonderful bourbon brand made in New York. And we helped with all things, not just supply chain, but brand development. So we helped with the liquid, we helped with the packaging, graphics design, and sourcing all those componentry pieces too. But like I said, if anyone is interested, I'll be more than happy to share our deck, which has more of our capabilities and kind of case studies in terms of brands we've worked with as well. Be more than happy to share that with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, well, two more questions. A question about best glass bottle suppliers that you recommend in Mexico.
So again, I would love to chat offline with that because I have lots of thoughts. So again, if you're interested, I'd be more than happy to help with that, either by putting you in contact with some folks or again, kind of helping you with the project.
Ian is a wealth of knowledge. Please send him an email so that he can share all those tips and advice for you. We have another question. It's related to tariffs, so buckle up. Can you
I do.
confirm? Can you confirm that raw materials warehouse in Europe will be charged subject to tarification, even if it is a company internal transfer, in parentheses, when shipped to the United States?
So from my experience with this, I go back to Brexit and when I worked in Ireland, and I worked for a company that also had a company in the UK. And even if we were pulling inventory from the UK to Ireland through our internal transfer, we were subject to tariffs. So I would assume that's like a global piece. So whether you're like, you could be a Canadian based company and you're bringing product from Italy to the United States and Italy's on the tariff list, you're going to be subject to that tariff. So as of right now, we're in a good spot. But again, anything can change in the future too. But the key is again just planning for that and being able to react if and when that does come into effect. And again, that's something we have experience with at MHW as well, because obviously we worked a lot with Scotch brands that were affected with the tariffs in 2018, 2019, as well as like German liqueurs. We had some Italian products as well that were on that list too. So as far as I know, I believe that even if it's an internal transfer, you still have to import it, still has to come through customs, it still has to go through the port. And at that point, that's where the customs broker, your customs agent, will have to flag.
Okay. I hope you're not tired of answering questions. We got two more.
No, fire
We
away.
got one, building a forecast using both historical trends and forecasts from the sales team. How do you handle discrepancies between those when they inevitably don't match up?
As in discrepancy, sorry.
Oh yeah, discrepancies. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, so that's can be the hardest part of data is hygiene is really important with regard to just like people input data in different ways. People will put an apostrophe in where apostrophe maybe isn't supposed to be, and then you do a control F and you can't find certain things. So sadly, there's no real quick solve for that. It's just to really iron through what you have. And if you have the time, you could go through purchase orders, you can pull out information. Like I said, when you're doing it as a small business and everything is in Excel and everything is in your just on your desktop or shared drive, it can be really, really hard to keep afloat. That's why I said there's a lot of resources and supports out there to help with that and take some of that off your plate. So as a brand, you can focus on the things that you're most likely good at, which is creating a wonderful product and actually being out selling it or talking to people about it and not having to worry about, oh my God, is my glass going to arrive on time? Are my labels there? How are we looking in terms of production? Like, can we actually satisfy the demand of orders coming through as well? So yeah, unfortunately, I've had many a late night going through Excel to see where the discrepancies are in terms of, again, a lot of it tends to be human error. So like, just again, a decimal point the wrong way, an extra zero or a lack of a zero can have a huge impact on a spreadsheet. So yeah, sadly, it's really, really menial, really manual. But like I said, if it's a weakness or if it's not even a weakness, so it's more of a burden, why not outsource it, or again look to have a solve that can help you and assist you versus to free you up, free your valuable time up.
Nice. Uh, Another question, do you have a plan if the surcharges for Chinese shipping proposed today are imposed as the ships are global, not restricted to China?
That is a great question. I would definitely have to defer to our logistics team. But again, if you want to send me an email with that information, I can definitely pop it to our logistics team. I think we import like tens of thousands of containers annually from not just China, but from across the board. So be more than happy to kind of get you some more insight on that. Unfortunately, I can't provide that and I don't want to misspeak. So definitely, like I said, get me that info, that person's contact, and I can ping that question to our senior logistics team and director of operations.
Mhm. All right, you see his email. We have another question. Not sure if I missed it. Did you share cash flow systems that you can pay?
So yeah, so we can definitely talk through that as well in terms of keeping that. Again, cash is king, keeping that through too. So a big part of what we do as part of a forecast potentially is to implement that forecast in conjunction with a business plan. So again, if I make all these cases, how much is going to cost me? How much should I sell them for? What is my potential return on that if I can get these cases sold? Because again, we utilize that a lot with our clients to help them get extra investment, because they might say, you know what, for me to sell this amount of cases, I probably need a marketing budget, and we can associate and tie your marketing into your sales plus your cost of goods to come up with a nice number of, if I can get X number of dollars, I can sell Y number of cases. And like I said, the key then is once you have that, tracking it, measuring it, being fluid, flexible, and keeping on top of it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Ian. This is the second of our second webinar of our series in 2025. We want to keep this going, keep the momentum going every month. Another webinar, maybe two, maybe three, I don't know, but I want to keep it informative for our members and across the board. So we appreciate you coming to the table and offering this wealth of knowledge. And again, you can reach out to Ian through that email address that he had on his slide, and then we will follow up with the webinar, the slides, and contact information as well too, and a follow-up email to everybody that registered and attended this webinar. But Discus webinars are available again at distilledspirits.org /events. And just wanted to remind everyone that the Discus conference is again at March 26th to the 28th this year in Washington, D.C. So please go to our events side of the website and please mark your calendars for that. And with that, have a great day, everyone. You may disconnect.
Thank you so much. Cheers, Caleb. Thanks all.